Let's talk magic. We're casting a wide net today. Magic is any framework that allows a fictional world to break the rules of the real world. This is an extremely wide net. It includes 5th level D&D spells, obviously magic. But it also includes psionics, superpowers, martial arts with ki blasts, cybernetics, Star Trek technologies, dragons, the undead. Oh, and the concept of leveling up. It's all magic. Well, this seems like an unnecessarily wide net, doesn't it? But here's the thing. These all do the same thing. They're all built for the same reason, and they all do the same thing. We are trying to tell a story. So we build a way to separate the reality in our fiction from the reality of our reality to tell the story better. It's that simple. Whatever magic system we come up with is a way to help us tell the story. Classic example would be Star Wars, where, you got Darth Vader and you got Luke, and they're battling it out with sabers, and they're using the Force magic. This same story could be told without the Force. It would be a father abandons his son grows up, realizes that his father is a Nazi working for a Nazi, and bands together with his father to kill off the head Nazi. That's the story. But reframing it like that removes a lot of the interpersonal connections and spirituality of the reality-breaking magic system. The Force in Star Wars isn't cool because it lets you move things. It's cool because it helps you to connect to everybody around you in a spiritual way. There's someone who can teach you something. There's someone who can learn from you. There's someone you can rely on, or someone you can kind of rival with. Here's a fundamental concept of goodness and evil that penetrates the entire universe, and you can just kind of rely on it. This allows us to tell a very different kind of story than Luke has a gun and his father is a Nazi. That would be a completely different story, as you can see. All magic systems are kinda like this. You break reality in a way that helps to tell a story. If your magic system doesn't help to tell your story, chances are nobody is going to like your magic system, and your story is going to have a ton of wasted effort put into it. Let's talk about another real common magic system, and that would be superheroes. Most superhero stories are framed almost entirely around a character. While there are some ensemble stories, there are some ensemble casts, usually any individual story will focus on just one of the characters, and that means that the power that that character has exists to reinforce their own personal journey. If their power does not reinforce their personal journey, then either their personal journey changes to suit their power, or their power changes to suit their personal journey. A good example of that would be Violet Parr from The Incredibles, who has the amazing tween-age ability to turn invisible because she doesn't want anybody noticing her. As the story goes on, her abilities improve, and she changes into someone that wants to protect rather than just be invisible, so she gains the ability to create force shields. These reflect her personal journey. Her powers reflect who she is and what she's struggling with, and that's basically universally true. Obviously, there are some outliers, which I would just call badly written superheroes, but for the most part, a superhero's powers reflect their personal journey. And if their personal journey changes, then their superhero powers change. It's that simple. But there's really no rules here. This is really an anything-goes environment. How do superpowers work? Sure, some settings have an explanation for who gets superpowers, but how do they work? Superman was born on Mars, so he can fly. Okay. Look, these guys are mutants, so they can throw ice around and stuff. Okay. How? None of that makes any sense at all. There's no explanation. It doesn't need an explanation because it's not that kind of magic system. This kind of magic system is a very personal one that helps to tell someone's specific story of them struggling in their specific way. So there's no need to bog it down with, oh, Superman has 85 magic watts of super strength or whatever. Now here's the funny thing. We find a lot of superhero stories changing from media to media. Like they'll go from comics to movies or from comics to games or whatever, right? And we often find that this magic setup doesn't really work very well in another environment. For example, video games. Now you can make video games about superheroes. I have seen one or two in my lifetime, but for the most part they fall into two categories. Either they're a game entirely built around one superhero, and the whole game is built around that one superhero's capabilities, or nobody has any powers at all, it's just glamour. Like, oh look, Superman has a 10 strength and Wolverine has a 6 strength, and that's it. That's the extent of what their powers actually mean. Well, in the first case, you're making a fine game. It's one hero and you're exploring their thing. But in the second case, you're not using the magic system. If you're baking everybody down to just some stats, then the magic system is just a background image on some stats. It's not helping to tell the story. Of course, these kinds of games tend to be gacha games, and those are pretty light on story in the first place. But the point here is that this magic system does not survive the transition to games intact because of the price of making stuff in games. If we wanted to have all of the X-Men in our game, whatever their various characters are, we would have to have a game where it supports flying characters and walking characters that can knock over buildings, and characters with range attacks and characters without range attacks. You need to have every single one of their capabilities baked into your systems, not only at a mechanical level, but also in terms of having all of the effects, like the particle effects, all of the assets. We have to have all of our walls be destructible. There are so many things that we have to do just for a couple of superheroes. And if we wanted to keep adding superheroes, every new unique power needs a lot more assets. Some of those are going to run way down into the depths of our architecture, as we have to reframe the entire world to let them use their magic powers. In a comic book, you just write, this dude shows up, he's got new powers, and everybody goes, okay, you're done. That you don't have to agonize over all of the assets you're gonna need. He's just got powers, and you just write that he's got those powers. But this doesn't necessarily mean that games are worse at storytelling. Generally speaking, games are worse at storytelling, but that's not the game's fault. That's the fault of the fact that we haven't really polished storytelling in games, and most studios seem to think that storytelling is something you should just put in at the last second by hiring one intern and having them write something terrible. Obviously, you're not going to get a great story that way, and your magic system isn't going to matter much. But I think if we talk a little bit about what makes magic systems suit different kinds of stories, we can really start to feel how having the right magic system will help you write your stories. And if it's a video game, they can actually just make your stories. They can just provide a framework for your stories, and the players will just get those stories by doing the magic. Whoa, sounds weird, right? Well, how about this? Let's say that we are responsible for creating a new computer RPG, a party-based computer RPG. And we have decided not to use D&D, and we're also not using D&D or D&D. And also, D&D is not on the table. So after turning down the 8 different categories of D&D, we have to come up with some new magic system that's not just whatever was popular in 1960. And so we decide that we are going to base our CRPG on Korean martial arts. They have this concept where you cultivate your martial arts and you pull energy into yourself, and over a long period of time you gather up all that power and you level up into a better martial artist, right? And they've got stages and all sorts of stuff built into their concept of what it means to be a martial artist. It's basically a space wizard. It has very little connection to anything I would consider martial arts in the real world. but that's fine because it's a video game. So if we wanted to make this into something which creates a story simply by existing, all we have to do is get a pattern into our magic system that helps to create the story. This is a party-based CRPG, right? So what sort of magic system would work well for a party? Well, first off, it would be nice if they could trade, powers. Like, you could power up one of your buddies and they could power you up and all that stuff. You're all supposed to be martial artists, so you don't want to have anything like a dedicated healer or whatever. But more importantly, we want the journey to feel like it is helping to tell a story. And as it turns out, the Korean concept of martial arts is kind of nice because there are steps. Like, you power up, and then you go over into a new category of martial arts rank. Like, oh, I've now formed my foundation, and now I'm golden core, and now I'm nascent spirit, or whatever. And these things come with a specific set of new powers and a specific meta explanation for how the magic works. We can throw that stuff aside and replace it with our own if we want, but the basic idea here is that at certain points you evolve to a new tier of martial arts. Like Pokemon. Now, in classic Korean comics and stories, when you do this, you just get stronger and stronger and stronger, and that's because most of these stories are about individual cultivators, like most superhero stories are about an individual superhero. But it's also pretty easy for us to change this so that it works well for creating stories on the fly, and we only have to make one small change. When you rank up, your level resets, but your new max level goes up. So that means that when someone in your party reaches golden core and forms that golden core, or in this case it's an ink black core, they get weaker. They are now the weakest person in your party for a while. And that means that combat in this game is less about having a tank and a DPS and a healer and a support character, and more about the fact that your characters are going to vary wildly in terms of their personal power level, and it's going to keep changing as to who is the strongest and who is the weakest. So when you're fighting, you're considering, well, can I use this guy in this particular place, or is he currently too weak? That sounds really interesting to me. And all of a sudden, we have this party dynamic where characters constantly step up and protect each other. Who's on point keeps changing. Fundamentally, we've built a magic system that allows a story to emerge, even if we haven't written a story. Even if these characters are just kind of walking around in the wilderness killing monsters for no reason, we still have a compelling party dynamic based solely on our magic system. And I don't want to pretend that's any kind of particularly awesome magic system either. There are a million kinds of magic systems that serve a million different kinds of stories, and all I'm asking, please think about your magic system, because I see a lot of people, whether they're writing comics or creating games, that just use whatever generic magic system they conceive of. Oh, look, people are vampires in my vampire game. It'll work exactly like vampires in every other vampire game ever made. How does it help you tell your unique personal story? Oh, look, it's a fantasy game with elves and magic on scrolls, and you memorize 8 magic spells every time you go to sleep every day. How does that help you tell your stories? There are so many comics and games where it's like, this universe has magic! And then immediately, like the next sentence is, but that magic isn't magic-y enough. Because it's too boring. It's stuff we've all seen a million times before. So here's another kind of magic that the main character has that's super magic. And it's like, why have the other magic system at all? Just because people expect it? Have a magic system that suits your needs. Take a little bit of time and think about not just how your magic system works, but how it unfolds. How it helps to drive characters along their arcs, how it helps characters to relate to other characters. These are important questions if you're trying to tell a story. At least I think so. Have a good one. Oh, you might have noticed I'm not posting very much on YouTube anymore. That's because YouTube is going down the shitter, and I'm not particularly interested in wasting my time here. But this was a nice, fun little talk, so I did it anyway.